The stagecoach thundered across the open plain, its wheels kicking up clouds of dust as the panicked horses bolted without direction. Inside, Penelope Lawson clutched desperately at the leather straps, her knuckles white with fear as her body was flung violently against the carriage walls. The driver was gone, thrown from his perch when the horses spooked at her rattlesnake, and now the stage raced wildly toward the steep embankment of Coyote Creek. "Help! Somebody please!" she screamed, though her voice was lost in the rumble of wheels and the terrified whinny of the four-horse team. Her traveling companions, an elderly banker and his wife, had been thrown clear when the stage first lurched, leaving Penelope alone in the runaway carriage. The brutal summer of 1878 had baked the Wyoming Territory into a harsh, unforgiving landscape. Penelope had been traveling from Boston to Laramie to take a position as a schoolteacher, carrying everything she owned in the trunk strapped to the top of the stage. Now, as the vehicle careened dangerously across the rough terrain, she wondered if she would live to see her new home. Lucas Xavier had been riding the range, checking on stray cattle from the Diamond Cross Ranch where he worked as head wrangler. At 28, he'd spent more than a decade in the saddle, his tall frame lean and weathered from years under the western sun. His dark hair fell in waves beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his deep-set eyes narrowed as he spotted the runaway stagecoach in the distance. "What in tarnation?" he muttered, immediately spurring his stallion forward. The muscular Palomino responded instantly, hooves pounding the earth as Lucas raced toward the stage. He could see it was headed for disaster. The creek bed was just a quarter-mile ahead, and at that speed, the coach would splinter like kindling when it hit the rocks below. Lucas pushed his horse harder, cutting across the prairie to intercept the runaway stage. As he drew alongside, he caught a glimpse of a woman's face in the window, terrified, beautiful, her honey-brown hair coming loose from its pins as she was tossed about inside. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him over the thunderous noise. With a skill born of years breaking wild horses, Lucas maneuvered his mount alongside the lead team. The horses were blind with panic, foam flying from their mouths as they galloped headlong toward destruction. The creek bed was now dangerously close, the ground beginning to slope downward. Lucas made a split-second decision. He leaped from his saddle onto the back of the nearest lead horse, balancing precariously as he fought to reach the harness connections. The animal bucked beneath him, nearly throwing him under the pounding hooves of the team. With one hand gripping the horse's mane, he drew his knife with the other. "Easy, easy," he called to the terrified animals as he slashed at the harness connecting the lead team to the coach. The leather gave way with a snap, and the front horses broke free, veering away from the coach. The stage slowed marginally, but the wheel team was still pulling it toward the embankment. Lucas slid back along the horse's flank, making a desperate jump onto the tongue of the coach. The wooden beam bounced violently beneath his boots as he struggled to maintain his balance. One slip meant certain death beneath the massive wheels. With heart pounding, he slashed at the remaining harnesses, freeing the wheel team one by one until the stage began to lose momentum. The horses scattered, leaving the coach to roll to a precarious halt just yards from the edge of the creek embankment. Penelope was half-conscious, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead where she'd struck the window frame. The door had been torn away during the wild ride, and she hung partially out of the opening. Her skirts caught on a broken piece of wood, dangerously dragging her toward the ground. Lucas rushed to her side, his knife making quick work of the fabric that trapped her. He slid strong arms beneath her, lifting her from the damaged coach just as it creaked and settled further toward the edge. "I've got you, miss," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You're safe now." Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. "The others," she whispered hoarsely. "Thrown clear back a ways," Lucas explained, carrying her away from the coach. "I'll go back for them once you're safe." He laid her gently on a patch of soft grass beneath a lone cottonwood tree, removing his bandana to dab at the blood on her forehead. "That's quite a cut you've got there. Name's Lucas Xavier, miss. I work the Diamond Cross about 10 miles east of here." "Penelope," she managed, her voice gaining strength. "Penelope Lawson. I was bound for Laramie." "Well, Miss Lawson, seems like your journey got a mite more exciting than you bargained for." His smile was warm, his touch gentle as he examined her injuries. "Anything feel broken?" She took stock of herself, wincing as she moved her limbs. "I don't think so, just bruised, perhaps." Her eyes suddenly widened. "My trunk, all my possessions, don't you worry about that now," Lucas said, glancing back at the precariously balanced coach. "Let's make sure you're right first, then I'll see what can be salvaged." He helped her sit up, supporting her with a steady hand at her back. Penelope became acutely aware of his closeness, the strength in his calloused hands, the faint scent of leather and open air that clung to him. Despite her ordeal, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. "Thank you," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "You saved my life." Lucas felt something shift inside him as he looked into her eyes, something he hadn't felt in a long time, if ever. "Just happened to be in the right place," he said modestly. "Not many men could have done what you did," Penelope insisted, "jumping onto those horses. Cutting them loose. It was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed." A flush crept up his neck, visible despite his tanned skin. "Let me fetch my horse and we'll go check on your fellow passengers. Then I'll see about getting you to town and finding a doctor to look at that cut." Lucas whistled sharply, and his palomino, which had stopped to graze nearby, trotted over. "This is Sundance," he said as the horse nuzzled his shoulder. "Best cow pony in the territory." Penelope smiled weakly, then attempted to stand. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and Lucas quickly caught her before she could fall. "Easy there," he said, his arm strong around her waist. "No need to rush. I've never been very good at being helpless," she admitted with a hint of frustration in her voice. Lucas chuckled. "I can see that about you already, Miss Lawson." He helped her to Sundance and lifted her into the saddle with an effortless motion that spoke of his strength. "Hold onto the horn. I'll lead him back to where I saw the others thrown." As they walked, Penelope had time to study her rescuer. Lucas moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His shoulders were broad beneath his worn shirt, his stride long and sure across the uneven ground. He was handsome in a rugged way that the gentlemen of Boston couldn't match. There was something authentic about him, something unvarnished and real. They found the elderly couple a half-mile back, shaken but largely unharmed. Mr. Hollister had protected his wife during their fall, resulting in a sprained ankle for himself but nothing worse. The driver, however, had not been so fortunate. His neck had broken when he was thrown from the box, and he lay still in the prairie grass, his eyes staring sightlessly at the vast blue sky. Lucas removed his hat respectfully. "I'll bring the authorities back for him," he said quietly. "Nothing to be done now." He helped the Hollisters onto Sundance behind Penelope, then led them all toward the nearest town, Silver Creek, a small settlement that had sprung up around a trading post and now served the surrounding ranches. The journey was slow, with Lucas walking alongside the horse, but Penelope found herself grateful for the time. Each step seemed to ease the shock from her system, allowing her to process what had happened, and what might have happened if not for the cowboy who now walked beside them, occasionally glancing up to check on her with concern in his dark eyes. Silver Creek consisted of little more than a main street with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a few other essential businesses. Lucas led them straight to the doctor's house, a whitewashed building with green shutters at the end of the street. Doc Miller was a grizzled man in his 60s who had seen everything from gunshot wounds to childbirth in his years on the frontier. He examined Penelope and the Hollisters efficiently, bandaging Penelope's head wound and wrapping Mr. Hollister's ankle. "You're a lucky young woman," he told Penelope as he finished. Head wounds bleed something fierce, but this one's not deep. Should heal clean if you keep it covered for a few days. Thank you, doctor, she said, wincing slightly as he applied a final dab of antiseptic. Lucas had waited patiently in the doctor's front room, rising to his feet when Penelope emerged. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," she assured him, though in truth her entire body ached, and she felt a weariness that seemed to reach her very bones. "The Hollisters are resting," she continued. "Mrs. Hollister said their son lives in Silver Creek. The doctor sent someone to fetch him." Lucas nodded. "That's good, and what about you? Do you have family nearby?" Penelope shook her head, suddenly feeling the enormity of her situation. "No. I was traveling to Laramie to take a position as the schoolteacher there. I don't know anyone in the territory." "And all your things were on that stage," Lucas finished for her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Yes, everything I own." The reality of it hit her hard, and she blinked rapidly to hold back tears. She had never been one to weep easily, but the events of the day had strained her usual composure. Lucas considered for a moment, then made a decision. "The Diamond Cross is closer than Laramie. Why don't you come back to the ranch with me? Mrs. Winters, our cook and housekeeper, can fix you up with some clothes and necessities. Once you're rested, I can take you to Laramie, or we can send word to them about what happened." Penelope hesitated. Back in Boston, going to a strange man's home would be unthinkable. But this wasn't Boston, and she had few options. Besides, there was something about Lucas Xavier that inspired trust. "That's very kind of you," she said finally, "if it wouldn't be an imposition." "Not at all," he assured her. "Mrs. Winters will be glad for the female company. She's always complaining about being surrounded by unwashed cowboys." His smile was warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Before leaving town, Lucas arranged with the local marshal to retrieve the stagecoach driver's body and what could be salvaged from the stage. He also purchased a few basic necessities for Penelope: a hairbrush, soap, and a shawl to ward off the evening chill. "I'll pay you back," Penelope insisted when he handed her the package. Lucas waved away her concern. "Consider it Diamond Cross hospitality." They set out for the ranch, with Penelope riding Sundance and Lucas walking alongside, leading the horse. As they left Silver Creek behind, the vast Wyoming landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in sage and buffalo grass, the distant mountains purple against the horizon, and overhead, a sky so wide and blue it made Penelope's heart ache with its beauty. "It's magnificent," she breathed, taking in the wilderness around them. Lucas glanced up at her, pleased by her reaction. "Most Easterners find it too empty at first." "Not empty," she corrected him, "just waiting, as if it's holding its breath for something." He studied her with new appreciation. "That's exactly it. I've never heard anyone put it that way before." The sun was beginning its descent when they reached the Diamond Cross Ranch. A collection of well-maintained buildings spread out beneath the shadow of a sloping hillside, a large main house built of logs and stone, a bunkhouse, stables, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and several cowboys were bringing in horses for the evening. "It's larger than I expected," Penelope admitted as they approached. "One of the bigger spreads in these parts," Lucas said with evident pride. "The Thorntons, the owners, built it up from nothing 15 years ago. I've been here for 10 of those years." A stocky older woman emerged from the main house as they rode into the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tidy bun, and her face was weathered but kind. "Lucas Xavier, who have you brought home?" she called, her hands moving to her hips in a gesture that reminded Penelope of her own mother. Lucas helped Penelope down from Sundance before answering. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Penelope Lawson. She was in a stage accident." "Miss Lawson, this is Harriet Winters, the best cook in the territory and the woman who keeps us all in line." Mrs. Winters clucked her tongue sympathetically when she saw Penelope's bandaged head. "Lord have mercy, child. Come inside and sit down before you fall down." The ranch house was surprisingly comfortable inside, with polished wooden floors covered in colorful rugs, sturdy furniture, and even a few touches of elegance in the form of framed paintings and a piano in the corner of the main room. Mrs. Winters led Penelope to a chair by the fireplace, then bustled off to prepare a cup of tea. "The Thorntons are back east visiting family," Lucas explained as Penelope looked around. "They go every summer. I run things while they're gone." "You're the foreman?" Penelope asked. "Head wrangler," he corrected. "Joseph Miller is foreman, but he's in Cheyenne with a cattle shipment, so for now I'm in charge." Mrs. Winters returned with a steaming cup of tea and a plate of freshly baked biscuits. "Drink this," she instructed Penelope. "Then we'll find you some clothes and get you settled in the guest room." Lucas explained the situation to Mrs. Winters, who listened with occasional exclamations of shock and sympathy. When he finished, she patted Penelope's hand. "You'll stay right here until you're recovered," she said firmly. "No sense in rushing off to Laramie in your condition." "But my position will send word to Laramie tomorrow," Lucas assured her. "Explain what happened. I'm sure they'll hold the job for you." Penelope wanted to protest further, but exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. The events of the day caught up with her all at once, and she found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. Mrs. Winters noticed immediately. "That's enough talking for tonight. This girl needs rest." She helped Penelope to her feet. "Come along, dear, I'll show you to your room." Penelope glanced back at Lucas as Mrs. Winters led her away. "Thank you again," she said softly, "for everything." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that struck her as both courtly and entirely natural coming from him. "Sleep well, Miss Lawson." The guest room was small but comfortable, with a bed covered in a handmade quilt and a window that looked out over the eastern pastures. Mrs. Winters helped Penelope out of her torn and dirty traveling dress, clucking in dismay over the bruises that marked her pale skin. "Those'll be sore tomorrow," she predicted, helping Penelope into a borrowed nightgown. "But you're young and strong. You'll heal quick enough." As soon as her head touched the pillow, Penelope fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the exhaustion of her ordeal claiming her completely. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sounds of ranch life men calling to one another, horses nickering, the clang of metal on metal from the blacksmith shed. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then memory returned the runaway stage, the terrifying plunge toward the creek bed, and Lucas Xavier's daring rescue. Penelope sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Every part of her ached and the cut on her forehead throbbed dully. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Winters' entrance, the older woman carrying a basin of water and a bundle of clothing. "Good morning, dear," she said cheerfully. "Brought you some things to wear. They belong to the Thorntons' daughter, Emily. She's married and living in Denver now, but she left some clothes behind." "You're about her size." "That's very kind, thank you," Penelope said, accepting the simple cotton dress and undergarments gratefully. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are," Mrs. Winters continued, setting down the basin. "Take your time, no need to rush on my account." After washing and dressing, Penelope made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Winters was rolling out dough for pie crusts. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air, and a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits waited on the table. "Sit and eat," Mrs. Winters instructed. "Lucas rode out early to check the herd, but he should be back soon. Said he'd take you into town later to see if the marshal recovered anything from your trunk." Penelope ate hungrily, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal since the previous morning. As she finished, Lucas entered through the back door, removing his hat as he stepped inside. He was dusty from riding, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders with sweat, but his smile was warm when he saw her. "Miss Lawson," he greeted her, "you're looking better this morning." "I feel better," she assured him, though her body still ached with every movement. "And please call me Penelope." "Penelope," he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his deep voice made her heart beat a little faster. "We've sent word to Laramie about your situation." In the meantime, I thought we might ride into Silver Creek and see if anything was salvaged from the stage." "I'd appreciate that," she said earnestly, "even if it's just a few things, Mrs." Winters insisted that Lucas eat before they left, and Penelope found herself studying him as he consumed a hearty breakfast. There was an economy to his movements, nothing wasted or showy. He ate like a man who knew the value of food and didn't take it for granted. After breakfast, Lucas saddled 2 horses Sundance for himself and a gentle mare named Daisy for Penelope. "She's steady as they come," he assured her as he helped her mount. "Won't give you any trouble." The ride to Silver Creek took just over an hour, during which Penelope discovered that Lucas was surprisingly easy to talk to. Born in Missouri, he had come west at 18, working his way through various ranches before settling at the Diamond Cross. He spoke with quiet pride about the work he did, his knowledge of horses evident in every word. "And what about you?" he asked as they approached the town. "What brings a Boston lady to Wyoming territory?" Penelope hesitated before answering. "A fresh start," she said finally. "My parents died last winter influenza. With them gone and no other close family, I wanted something completely different. Teaching positions are more plentiful out west, and the pay is better than what I could earn in Boston." "I'm sorry about your parents," Lucas said, his voice gentle. "Losing family is never easy." "No," she agreed softly, "it isn't. But they raised me to be independent and resourceful. I think they would approve of this adventure even with its somewhat dramatic beginning." His smile returned at that. "Well, we'll make sure the rest of your Wyoming adventure goes a bit smoother." In Silver Creek, they found that the marshal and some local men had managed to retrieve Penelope's trunk from the wrecked stagecoach. It was damaged, the lid partially crushed, but most of the contents remained intact. "It's a miracle," she breathed, running her fingers over the monogrammed leather. "I thought it would be destroyed." "Stage was built solid," the marshal explained. "Stopped just short of going over the edge. Another few feet and it would have been kindling at the bottom of the creek." The reality of how close she had come to death sent a shiver through Penelope. Lucas noticed and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Let's get your things back to the ranch," he said quietly. "You can sort through everything there." They secured the trunk to a packhorse the marshal lent them and began the journey back to the Diamond Cross. Halfway there, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, and Lucas frowned at the sky. "We've got a storm coming," he observed. "Might be a bad one. We should pick up the pace." They urged their horses into a faster trot, but the storm moved more quickly than anticipated. The wind rose suddenly, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a deep rumble of thunder. "There's a line shack just over that rise," Lucas called over the rising wind, pointing to a low hill ahead. "We won't make it back to the ranch before this hits." They had just reached the small cabin when the first heavy drops began to fall. Lucas quickly unsaddled the horses and led them into the lean-to shelter attached to the shack, while Penelope carried her recovered possessions inside. The line shack was a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs. It was clean but Spartan, designed as temporary shelter for cowboys working the distant portions of the ranch. Lucas entered, shaking water from his hat. "Storm's really coming down now," he observed, moving to the fireplace. "Might as well make ourselves comfortable. We could be here a while." He built a fire with practiced efficiency, using kindling and logs stored in a box beside the hearth. Soon, a cheerful blaze chased the dampness from the small space. Outside, the rain fell in sheets, drumming on the wooden roof. Penelope sat at the table, suddenly acutely aware that she was alone with Lucas in very close quarters. In Boston, such a situation would cause irreparable damage to a young woman's reputation. Here in Wyoming, it seemed a simple matter of practical necessity. Still, she felt a flutter of something, not fear exactly, but a heightened awareness of him as he moved about the cabin. "Are you hungry?" he asked, opening a small cupboard that held basic provisions. There's always food kept here for emergencies. A little, she admitted. Lucas set about preparing a simple meal of beans, dried beef reconstituted in a skillet, and hardtack softened over the fire. It wasn't fancy fare, but the warm food was welcome as the temperature dropped with the storm. "How's your head feeling?" he asked as they ate. Penelope touched the bandage gingerly. "Better. It doesn't throb quite as much." "Good." He studied her across the table, his expression thoughtful. "You know, most women I've met from back east would be falling apart after what you've been through. You're handling it remarkably well." "What good would falling apart do?" she asked pragmatically. "Besides, I've always believed that character is revealed in difficult moments. I'd prefer mine to be revealed as steady rather than hysterical." Lucas laughed, a rich sound that filled the small cabin. "Miss Penelope Lawson, I think Laramie is getting quite a schoolteacher in you." "If I ever get there," she said with a small smile. "You will," he assured her. "Though I must admit, I'm in no great hurry to see you go." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Penelope felt warmth rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I still need to thank you properly," she said after a moment. "What you did yesterday jumping onto those horses, cutting them loose, it was extraordinary." Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Penelope said firmly. "Not anyone. It took remarkable courage and skill. You saved my life, Lucas Xavier, and I won't have you diminish that." He met her gaze, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that their meeting had not been mere chance but something more significant. The storm continued through the afternoon and into the evening, the rain occasionally giving way to hail that clattered against the roof and walls. They passed the time talking, learning about each other in the intimate confines of the small cabin. Lucas told stories of his years on the ranch, of cattle drives and horse breaking, and the camaraderie of the cowboys. Penelope shared memories of Boston, of teaching at a girls' school there, and her dreams of building something meaningful in her new Western home. As darkness fell, the situation they had both been politely ignoring became unavoidable. There was only one bed in the cabin. "I'll sleep on the floor by the fire," Lucas said immediately. "You take the bed." "Don't be ridiculous," Penelope protested. "You're much too large for this floor. The bed should be yours." "My mother would rise from her grave and haunt me if I took a bed while a lady slept on the floor," he said firmly. "I've slept in far worse places, believe me." Penelope wanted to argue further but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. "Very well, but at least take the blanket. I have my shawl." "Not a chance," he countered. "You take the bed with all its fixings. I'll be fine by the fire." The rain continued to drum on the roof as they prepared for sleep. Penelope removed her shoes and outer dress, keeping on the shift she wore beneath. She felt Lucas's eyes politely averted as she slipped beneath the rough blanket on the narrow bed. For his part, Lucas removed his boots and gun belt, then settled himself on the floor near the hearth, using his rolled-up coat as a pillow. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the curl of his dark hair. "Good night, Penelope," he said softly. "Good night, Lucas," she replied, then added hesitantly, "Thank you for taking care of me." He turned his head to look at her, his expression gentle in the flickering light. "It's my pleasure." Penelope lay awake for some time, listening to the rain and the occasional pop from the fire. She was acutely conscious of Lucas's presence just a few feet away, this man who had rushed fearlessly to her rescue, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. In the 2 days she had known him, he had upended all her notions of what Western men might be like. She thought he had fallen asleep when his voice came quietly through the darkness. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Why teaching? You seem educated enough to have other options." Penelope smiled at the ceiling. "I believe education is the most powerful force for change in the world. Every child who learns to read, to think critically, to question and seek knowledge, that child can change the future. I wanted to be part of that." There was a pause, then Lucas said, "I never had much schooling myself." Learned to read and cipher well enough, but that was about it. Sometimes I wonder what it might have been like to have more. It's never too late to learn, Penelope said quietly. Maybe you're right. There was a smile in his voice. Maybe I'll be your first pupil in Laramie. I'd be honored, she replied, and meant it. The storm passed during the night, and they awoke to a brilliant morning, the world washed clean by the rain. After a simple breakfast of coffee and the remainder of their provisions, they saddled the horses and resumed their journey to the Diamond Cross. The ranch came into view just as the sun reached its zenith, the buildings golden in the midday light. Several cowboys were working in the corrals, breaking what looked to be wild horses. They paused in their work to wave as Lucas and Penelope rode in. Mrs. Winters hurried out to meet them, her face creased with concern. "Thank heavens you're safe. We were worried sick when the storm hit and you didn't return. We took shelter in the North Line shack," Lucas explained as he helped Penelope dismount. "Waited out the worst of it there." The housekeeper's eyes widened slightly, and Penelope felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the implication. Lucas, noticing, quickly added, "Miss Lawson's reputation is perfectly intact, Mrs. Winters. You've no cause for concern." "Of course not," the older woman said briskly. "I never suggested otherwise. Now come inside, both of you. Dinner's nearly ready and you must be famished." Over the next few days, Penelope fell into the rhythm of life at the Diamond Cross. Her injuries healed quickly, the cut on her forehead fading to a thin pink line that would eventually disappear entirely. Word came from Laramie that the school term had been delayed due to repairs needed on the schoolhouse, giving her additional time to recover before taking up her position. Lucas was often busy with ranch duties, but he made time each day to check on her, sometimes inviting her to ride with him as he inspected the herds or repaired fencing. Penelope found herself looking forward to these outings, to the easy conversations they shared, and the way he listened intently to her thoughts and opinions, treating them with genuine respect. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Lucas found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Beyond words," she agreed. "I've never seen anything like these western sunsets. They make Boston seem confined." "Do you miss it? Boston, I mean." Penelope considered the question carefully. "I miss certain things, my parents' house, the libraries, the familiarity of it all, but no, I don't think I miss the place itself." She turned to look at him. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," he assured her. "I felt the same way about Missouri when I first left. Missed my family, missed certain comforts, but not the place." They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. A cool breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I received another letter from Laramie today," Penelope said finally. "The school repairs are almost complete. They expect to begin classes in 2 weeks." Lucas nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "So you'll be leaving us soon?" "Yes, I should go in a few days to get settled before the term begins." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'll miss it here." "The Diamond Cross has a way of working itself into your heart," Lucas agreed, though his eyes told her he was speaking of more than just the ranch. Penelope felt a tightness in her chest that was both sweet and painful. In the short time she had been at the ranch, something had grown between them, something neither had put into words, but that hung in the air whenever they were together. "Lucas," she began, then faltered, unsure how to express what she was feeling. He turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers in the fading light. "Yes, I." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "I want to thank you for everything, not just the rescue, but for making me feel welcome here, for showing me what Wyoming can be." It wasn't what she had truly wanted to say, but it was safer, less vulnerable. Lucas seemed to understand. He reached across the space between them and took her hand gently in his. "It's been my pleasure, Penelope, truly." The warmth of his calloused fingers around hers sent a thrill through her body. They sat that way as darkness settled over the ranch, neither willing to break the connection that had formed between them. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to the Diamond Cross. A band of rustlers had been spotted near the north boundary, and Lucas organized a group of cowboys to track them. He found Penelope in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Winters with the breakfast dishes. "I have to ride out," he explained, his expression apologetic. "Probably won't be back until tomorrow." Disappointment washed through her, though she tried not to show it. "Of course, be careful." "Always am," he assured her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "When I get back, we should talk about getting you to Laramie." Penelope nodded, aware that Mrs. Winters was watching them with barely concealed interest. Yes, that would be sensible. Lucas hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. "Until tomorrow, then." After he left, Mrs. Winters gave Penelope a knowing look. "That boy's sweet on you," she stated matter-of-factly. Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "We've only known each other a short time." "Time doesn't matter much with some things," the older woman said wisely. "My Henry proposed after knowing me just 2 weeks. We had 43 good years together before he passed." "This is different," Penelope protested weakly. "I have a position waiting in Laramie, and Lucas has his responsibilities here." "MMHMM," Mrs. Winters hummed, clearly unconvinced. "Life has a way of working itself out when two people are meant to be together. You mark my words." The day passed slowly without Lucas. Penelope helped Mrs. Winters with various household tasks, then spent time organizing her recovered belongings. Many of her books had survived the stage accident, and she took comfort in their familiar presence as she contemplated the changes ahead. That night, a sudden commotion in the yard woke her from a light sleep. Voices called to one another with urgency, and horses' hooves pounded on the packed earth. Wrapping a shawl around her nightgown, Penelope hurried to the window. In the moonlight, she could see several riders dismounting. One man was being supported between two others, seemingly unable to stand on his own. With a jolt of fear, she recognized Lucas's tall form, his head hanging forward as the men helped him toward the house. Penelope rushed downstairs, reaching the front door just as they brought him inside. His shirt was torn and bloody, his face pale beneath his tan. "What happened?" she demanded, her heart pounding with fear. "Rustlers," one of the cowboys explained grimly. "They ambushed us in the North Canyon. Lucas took a bullet trying to protect young Jamie there." The young cowboy in question stood nearby, his face stricken with guilt. "He pushed me out of the way, Miss Lawson. Bullet was meant for me." Mrs. Winters appeared, hastily tying her robe. "Get him to his room," she ordered. "I'll fetch the medical supplies." She turned to Penelope. "You know anything about tending wounds?" "Some," Penelope replied, her practical nature asserting itself despite her fear. "My father was a doctor. I assisted him occasionally." "Good, you'll help me then." They followed the men to Lucas's room, a simply furnished space with a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a desk covered with ranch ledgers. The cowboys laid him carefully on the bed, then respectfully withdrew, leaving only Mrs. Winters and Penelope. Lucas was conscious but groggy with pain. His eyes found Penelope's as she approached the bed. "Sorry about the dramatic entrance," he managed, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. "Hush," she admonished gently, helping Mrs. Winters remove his torn shirt. "Save your strength." The bullet had struck his left shoulder, the wound ugly but not immediately life-threatening. Mrs. Winters cleaned it carefully while Penelope held Lucas's hand, offering what comfort she could as he endured the painful process. "Bullet went clean through," Mrs. Winters pronounced finally. "That's a mercy. No digging required." She bandaged the wound with practiced efficiency, then prepared a dose of laudanum for the pain. "This will help you sleep," she told Lucas. "Rest is what you need now." After he had taken the medicine, Mrs. Winters tactfully withdrew, leaving Penelope alone with him. The laudanum was already taking effect, his eyelids growing heavy. "You should rest too," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Don't need to stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Penelope replied firmly, settling into the chair beside his bed, his lips curved in a faint smile. Stubborn woman. Yes, she agreed, smoothing back a lock of dark hair that had fallen across his forehead. Now sleep. Lucas's breathing eventually deepened as the laudanum pulled him into unconsciousness. Penelope sat watching him, her mind racing with emotions she could no longer deny. The thought of losing him had clarified her feelings with startling clarity. She loved this man she had known for such a short time. Loved his courage, his quiet strength, his respect for her mind and opinions. Loved the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, as if she were something precious and rare. Mrs. Winters returned with a cup of tea and a knowing look. You should get some rest, she advised. I can sit with him for a while. I'm fine, Penelope insisted. I want to be here if he wakes. The housekeeper nodded, unsurprised. I thought as much. Well, drink your tea at least, and call me if there's any change. Throughout the night, Penelope kept her vigil. She bathed Lucas's forehead when fever set in, spoke soothing words when he grew restless, and held his hand through the worst of the pain. By morning, the fever had broken, and he slept more peacefully. The next few days passed in a blur of nursing duties. Penelope rarely left Lucas's side, reading to him when he was awake, tending his wound when necessary, and ensuring he took proper nourishment. Mrs. Winters watched their growing closeness with approval, though she said nothing directly. As Lucas began to recover, the time for Penelope's departure to Laramie grew closer. The school term would begin in just a week, and she needed to prepare. Yet she found herself reluctant to leave, inventing reasons to stay just one more day, then another. On the afternoon of the 5th day after his injury, Lucas was well enough to sit on the porch, his arm in a sling but his color much improved. Penelope joined him, bringing a pot of coffee and 2 cups. Mrs. Winters says you're healing remarkably well, she observed, pouring the coffee. Strong constitution, he replied with a half-smile, and excellent nursing care. Penelope felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. I did what anyone would do. No, he said, his voice suddenly serious. Not anyone, you've been extraordinary, Penelope. She met his gaze, her heart quickening at the intensity she found there. It was the least I could do after you saved my life. Is that the only reason you stayed? He asked quietly. Obligation? No, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. That's not why I stayed. Lucas reached across with his good arm and took her hand. The school in Laramie is expecting you, yes. When do you need to leave? Penelope looked down at their joined hands. Soon, within a day or 2 at most. Lucas was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. I have no right to ask you to stay, he said finally. You came west for a purpose and I respect that. But, she prompted, sensing there was more. But I can't let you go without telling you what's in my heart. He tightened his grip on her hand. I know it's fast, impossibly fast by most standards, but from the moment I pulled you from that stagecoach, something changed in me. These weeks with you have been the most meaningful of my life. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. Lucas, let me finish, he said gently. I understand if you need to go to Laramie. I understand if what I'm feeling isn't matched by your own feelings, but I had to tell you that I love you, Penelope Lawson. And if there's any chance at all that you might someday return that love, I'll wait, however long it takes. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. Oh, Lucas, she whispered, you don't need to wait, I already love you. The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Truly, truly, she confirmed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. I've been fighting it because it seemed so improbable loving someone after such a short acquaintance. But when you were shot, when I thought I might lose you. She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. Come here, Lucas said softly, tugging gently on her hand. Penelope rose from her chair and moved to sit beside him. With his good arm, he drew her close, his fingers tenderly wiping away her tears. I don't want to keep you from your dreams, he said earnestly. Teaching is important to you, and I would never ask you to give that up. There are children here who need education too, Penelope pointed out, her practical nature asserting itself even through her emotion. The ranch hands children, the families at the neighboring spreads. Perhaps I could start a small school here. Lucas's eyes lit with possibility. The Thorntons have talked about building a schoolhouse for years. There are at least a dozen children within riding distance who have no formal education. Then perhaps this is where I'm meant to be after all, she said, a sense of rightness settling over her. Not in Laramie, but here, with you. Lucas cupped her cheek gently, his gaze holding hers. I want to do this properly. Will you marry me, Penelope Lawson, be my wife, build a life with me here? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you, Lucas Xavier. He leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a tender kiss that held both promise and passion. Penelope responded with all the love in her heart, knowing that her life had changed irrevocably not when the stagecoach ran away. But in the moment, this remarkable man had cut the horses loose and lifted her to safety. They were married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at the Diamond Cross. The Thorntons, delighted by Lucas's happiness and impressed by Penelope's intelligence and determination, not only gave their blessing but offered to build the schoolhouse she had envisioned. By the following spring, it stood completed on a gentle rise overlooking the ranch, a place of learning for children who had previously had no access to education. Penelope's classroom quickly became known throughout the region for its excellence, drawing students from as far as 20 miles away. Some boarded with nearby families during the week, eager for the opportunity to learn from the Boston-trained teacher who had brought new methods and ideas to this remote corner of Wyoming. Lucas continued as head wrangler at the Diamond Cross, his skill with horses undiminished despite the slight stiffness that remained in his left shoulder. In the evenings, he often sat in on Penelope's lessons for adults, ranch hands, and neighboring settlers who wished to improve their reading and mathematics. His quick mind absorbed the knowledge eagerly, and Penelope found that teaching her husband was one of her greatest joys. They built a small house of their own on Diamond Cross land, not far from the main ranch house, a comfortable home filled with books and warmth and laughter. And when their first child was born a year after their marriage, a daughter with her mother's sage green eyes and her father's dark hair, they named her Hope, for what had brought them together and what they had found in each other's arms. On the 5th anniversary of the day, Lucas had rescued Penelope from the runaway stage. They rode together to the spot where the coach had nearly plunged into Coyote Creek. The place was peaceful now, wildflowers growing along the embankment, no sign remaining of the drama that had unfolded there. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years, Penelope mused, looking down at the creek bed below. So much has changed. For the better, Lucas said, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. At 33, he was in his prime, his face weathered by the Wyoming sun, but his eyes still bright with the same warmth and intelligence that had first drawn her to him. Definitely for the better, she agreed, smiling up at him. At 27, Penelope had lost none of her spirit or determination. If anything, life in the West had only strengthened these qualities while softening others. Though I still maintain you were unnecessarily reckless, jumping onto those horses the way you did. Lucas laughed, pulling her into his arms. If I hadn't been reckless, you might never have looked at me twice. Oh, I would have noticed you, she assured him, reaching up to touch his cheek. How could I not? He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their years together, along with the promise of many more to come. We should head back, Penelope said when they finally parted. Hope will be wondering where we've gone and Mrs. Winters can only distract her for so long with cookie baking. And we wouldn't want to miss the cookies, Lucas teased, helping her back onto her horse. As they rode side by side toward home, Penelope reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. A terrifying moment that could have ended in tragedy had instead led to the greatest joy of her life. The runaway stage had carried her not just to Wyoming territory, but to her destiny, to Lucas, to their family, to the community they had helped build together. Sometimes, she thought, the most frightening journeys led to the most beautiful destinations. And sometimes, rescue came in forms you never expected: a brave cowboy cutting horses loose from a runaway stage, lifting you to safety, and in doing so, showing you the way home.